Okay, let's work on storing the roles data. So we'll be storing the role data along with the permissions, and because it's obvious that a role will have permissions associated with it, so we'll let the user select the permissions and then store the data accordingly. So let's go ahead and create a new create page. So I think we can copy this page and paste that directly in here, and maybe we can make use of some components from here. So the route is gonna be roles.store, create a new role, and the form looks good, and we have the action in the model itself. So what I want to do is I want to move that to the form because that's what the general behavior should be. So actions are associated with forms, and we have the input for name. So this is actually title, and the label is gonna be title, and we don't need these. We'll need a Splade select, and the name is gonna be permissions. And since we are letting the users select multiple permissions, so this is gonna be an array. And one more thing that I recently found out was we can instead of passing in a default value like this, what we can do is we can pass in a placeholder. So this will internally create that for us. So we can pass in select permissions, and here what we want to do is we want to loop over the permissions. So we haven't defined the permissions yet from the controller side, so we'll do that in a minute. So here what we want to do is we want to display the permission data, and the value is going to be permission ID, and here instead of class name it's actually title, and we can remove this. So that's the only thing we need. We can remove the file upload component, Splade submit, and we can also pass in the spinner. I think it's called spinner equals to true. Maybe I need to double check that. Okay, so this should be binded like this so that it actually evaluates to true instead of a string value. And what else do we have? Okay, this looks good from the view side. Let's go ahead to the controller, implement that. So let's create a create method to render the view. So return view roles.create. Okay, we also need the permissions data. So permissions is going to be permission all. Let's import the model and let's pass in the permissions. Okay, let's go ahead and test this thing out. And maybe, okay, I think we have done that already. So we have defined the route. We have also defined the link over link component along with the slide over prop passed in. So let's test it out now. Let's click on add role, and okay, this looks good. So I think the placeholder thing didn't work out in here because I can't see it. Maybe we need to check out the documentation. So where's that? Select. Okay, I can't find that. Okay, inside form components, the select component, and we can pass in the options, the label, we can pass in as a slot. Okay, we also want them to select multiple items because a role can have multiple permissions. So let's pass that multiple value placeholder. Okay, we have that placeholder, but I think we should pass it inside Splade select. Yep, we are doing that. Maybe I have made some spelling mistakes, so I'll just copy that from here and paste that. Okay, that looks good. And what else do we have? Okay, so one more thing that we have here is a relation prop. So what this does is it will populate the select component automatically. So in cases like in edit pages where we want to populate the select component, so in that case this is going to be really helpful. So we'll use that later. And so we can also integrate the choices.js. So just by passing in the choices value, I think somewhere it was, okay, yep, here we have that. So we can pass in the choices attribute or prop, and that will give us a nice choice functionality. So improved UI. let's go ahead and test this out. So let's click on add role. And okay, now as you can see, we have the select permissions. We can also pass in the placeholder for the title. And okay, this has some issues. I'm not really sure why. Maybe the issues with the Splade component itself. So we can pass in a label for this. So when we click on the label, then it is gonna open up properly. So as you can see, when I click on, okay, now it worked out. So sometimes it does, and sometimes, okay, when we click on this, then it works, and when I click somewhere here, then it's not working. Maybe I should remove the placeholder, and let's also cut the label for now, and let's see if this works. Okay, same issue. So I'll just pass that placeholder and also pass that label. So select permissions, let's click on add role, and it's still not working, but when I click on the label, then it opens up properly. So we can now select multiple items and assign the permissions to a certain role. So the create page looks good, and now it's time to work on the controller part. So let's go to the controller and define the store method. So we'll also implement validations in here, so let's define that first. So artisan make request store role request. So let's import that in here, and let's define the permissions here. So for now, what we'll do is we'll just pass in a default value of true, so that all the authorization checks pass by default, and later we'll implement a proper authorization check, so whether a certain user has proper permissions to update the resource or not. So we'll implement that later once we implement the roles and permissions properly. So let's keep that for now. And for the rules, what I'm going to do is I'll just copy and paste the roles and explain to you. So here, what I want to do is for the title, the rules are required string and max 255. The permissions is going to be an array of permissions, and it's required. And for the individual permissions, what I want to do is it's going to be required, and it's going to be an integer type and should exist in the permissions table. So that's the default permissions that I want to implement. So now let's go and create the role. So the role is going to be role create, and the title request title, and I also want to sync the permissions. So instead of attach, let's sync it. So let's import the model, and we are performing the sync task. And now we can return the user to the roles or index, and this is not yet implemented. We'll implement that later. So we need to implement the toast for that. So maybe in the next video I'll do that. And okay, this should now work. Let's go ahead and test this thing out. So the title is gonna be, let's see, some title. I'm gonna delete this in a while, so let's click on submit. And okay, we have that role created, and to test out whether the permissions were added properly or not, we can check out the role underscore permission. Okay, permission underscore role, and okay, we have role ID 3, and these permissions are applied to it, so that seems to work. So okay, this much for this video, and in the next part we'll work on editing the record, so that should be fairly simple as well. So I'll see you guys in the next one.